Hello and welcome to Running to Redline. Today we're going to be talking about the 10 best sports cars that you can buy under $50,000 used in 2023. Now keep in mind before we get started that this is my personal preferences and just my personal list. If you think there's any cars that I missed or belong on this list, be sure to leave a comment of what they are below. That way anyone in the market for a car in this price range can know what else is out there and have those options available to them. So with that being said, let's get started. Kicking off our list at number 10 is the 2015 to 2016 Alfa Romeo 4C. This, in my opinion, is a sports car that goes very underappreciated due to the rarity of them. You pretty much never see them, and there's a lot more options out there that are pretty much a lot more accessible and thrown in your face. But the 4C is basically Alfa Romeo's version of a race car that is made to be street legal. It is pretty raw, weighs only 2,400 pounds, which shockingly is not the lightest car on this list, and the DCT transmission that it comes with is kind of like that of a race car in that it feels very pneumatically shifted and is said to have a very racy feel to it. The car itself has been said to be very glued to the road, and everyone that drives one says it is one of the most immersive and raw driving experiences that you can get, especially at this price point. On top of that, the 4C looks extremely exotic and would definitely turn a lot of heads, as not only are they rare like I said and have not been seen a ton, but they do look pretty wild for what they are. Getting into some pros and cons of the 4C, it has a very raw driving feel due to the minimal assist that this car comes with. The brakes and steering are both very little power assisted. The car looks like an absolute supercar for what it is. I think a lot of people would not even know what it is. And it comes with removable body panels, which makes it pretty easy to work on. And lastly is the incredible agility due to this car's super low weight and very low center of gravity. Now, the cons for this car would be the expensive maintenance, being any Italian automobile, and high NVH, which, if you don't know, is noise, vibration, and harshness. It is a pretty rough ride, so if you're looking for something a bit more comfortable, or maybe you have back problems or anything like that, this might not be the car for you. Getting into some proof of price here, as we look around, there's plenty of them available, well under $50,000. You're probably going to get closer to that $50,000 mark as you look for a good example, like this red one here with only 9,000 miles. So this is pretty much a new car that you could find right at $49,000. Slotting in at number 9 is another car that goes pretty under the radar, and that is the Lexus RCF. This car, I'm talking about the years from 2015 to 2019, and it came with a big 5.0 liter V8, something that you do not really see at a Toyota or Lexus very often. But this V8 produced almost 470 horsepower, and the RCF is an absolute monster when it comes to acceleration. The car is pretty luxurious and also pretty convenient and practical. It's a 2+2 coupe, so it does have a back seat that is a little bit more usable than most 2+2s, as well as some good trunk space. Now, the RCF has pretty good styling, but is definitely a bit more low profile and under the radar. That could be good for you, or it could be bad, but overall, this car definitely gets overlooked a lot. The V8 sounds incredible, and the handling is pretty good for what the car is. Now, it is probably the heaviest car on this list, weighing it at almost 4,000 pounds, so you're probably not going to, whip it around a track or anything like that. But for a street car, it is plenty of fun. And some pros and cons, you get the Lexus reliability. This is a Toyota-made engine, so you're not going to have too many issues. None of these cars have been said to have plenty of issues. The parts and maintenance are also going to be really cheap, coming from Toyota. And the V8 gives an incredible sound with very high horsepower, making it plenty of fun for the road and can definitely get you into some trouble. The car is low profile if you are looking for something that is not going to be warranting a bunch of staring and is going to go a bit more under the radar from cops even. This car will definitely do that. And it has a pretty luxurious interior, especially compared with something like what is next on this list. Now, the cons of this car, it's heavy with some sloppy handling. It is the heaviest car that we have here today, so that is something to note. And the transmissions in these cars have been said to be pretty bad. They shift pretty oddly at times. It can be quite a bit of a hassle to get it to be in the right gear. But other than that, we're just going to take a look at some of them. There's plenty of good examples, around $40,000 even. But similar to the Alfa, once you creep towards $50,000, this is where you're going to find the most premium examples, like this red one here with pretty low mileage, available for $49,000 right now. So I just made fun of this car's interior, and with good reason, because at number 8 we're talking about the Lotus Elise. This is the car from Lotus that ran from 2005 to 2009 and kind of marked the beginning of the new era of Lotus vehicles after the Esprit was discontinued in 2004. Now, the Elise is the lightest car on this list, weighing in at just under 2,000 pounds, so it is indeed a death trap to any of those who dare to drive one. Now, the Elise shares a pretty similar ideology to the Alfa Romeo 4C in that it kind of throws power out the window and puts all the emphasis on handling and driver engagement and driving experience, and it does so very well. The Elise is pretty much stuck to the road, produced 1.03 Gs on the skid pad, which is more than any of the cars we've talked about so far, and is all around a pretty exotic car for what you are paying. A lot of people wouldn't even know what they are, and the Elise shares the same exotic look that the 4C does. Now, getting into some of the pros and cons of the Lotus Elise, first and foremost is the Toyota engine internals. In 2005, Lotus started to borrow engine parts from Toyota for their engines just to make them a little bit more reliable and to kind of settle down some of the claims that Lotus was an unreliable brand and to kind of dilute that reputation that they had. The only downside of this, though, is it wasn't until around 2012 that they started to borrow all of Toyota's engine parts, so the computer, the electronics, and some of the other engine components, such as your intake, are Lotus, which means, one, they're not very reliable, and two, the parts are extremely difficult to find. I know someone who had an Esprit, and when a fuel pump went bad, it took 6 months to even get their hands on one, so that is definitely a downside to these cars. But some of the upsides are the race-worthy handling that these cars can provide. They are pretty much glued to the road and will absolutely amaze you around a corner. They're very rare and exotic looking. You don't see them frequently, and they definitely have that special feel to them. And the driving experience is very immersive, as Lotus really does try to make it feel like a race car to you. Now, the only other downsides to this car are that it is very hard on consumables. For whatever reason, the tires and brake pads kind of get destroyed and eaten on these cars, but that's not too big of a deal. And lastly, the car is ridiculously impractical. I mean, there's literally aluminum panels exposed on the inside, and there is no storage for anything whatsoever. But if you can live with that, the Elise is definitely a good option. So looking at some of them that we can find online, there are plenty well under $50,000. You can even find some that are getting into the high 30s, but for some of your Supreme examples, you're going to be looking a little bit closer to 45. Now, taking the number 7 spot on our list today is the Audi RS3, specifically the 2015 to 2020 years, which is the third generation of the car. Now, I always like to have one sedan on the list in case maybe you have young kids or are just looking to have something a little bit more practical. So this is pretty much it. This is going to be the most practical car on this list, and the RS3 is powered by a pretty cool engine. It's an inline 5-cylinder turbo made by Audi that sounds quite a bit like a baby V10 in my opinion. It has that same kind of ring to it, just on a bit of a quieter lower level. Now, don't be fooled, the RS3 is no slouch. It comes equipped with Audi's all-wheel drive system known as Quattro, which gets it off the line extremely quick at up to 60 miles an hour in just 3.5 seconds. So the RS3 is extremely quick in a straight line. The handling is going to be a little bit subpar compared to most cars on this list, as it is a little bit heavier and the wheelbase is also just a little bit longer. Now, the manual in this car is said to be pretty good, not as good as maybe BMW's for example, but if you don't like the manual transmission, the DCT that Audi makes is also absolutely incredible, so you really can't go wrong with one of these cars. They're nice, they're pretty low profile, and you're not going to have too many people staring at them, so if you're not looking for a whole lot of attention or anything, these cars can definitely fly under the radar, and they're pretty much Germany's ultimate sleeper right now. Now, getting into the pros and cons for the RS3, it is a sedan, so it does have that very high practicality. Audi's all-wheel drive system is great, and as I've touched on, they do sound a little bit like a V10. Now, that's just my opinion. You might think I'm crazy for thinking that. You can go and listen to one, but that's just always kind of how I've thought of them. They have that really high build quality that Audi gives you with the really nice heads-up display and interior that pretty much any Audi vehicle comes with, and they are very low profile. They're not going to be turning a ton of heads. Now, some of the cons would be the expensive maintenance. Any kind of German vehicle is going to suffer this issue, and like most Audis that can experience electrical issues, that's pretty much been the only thing that people have reported on the reliability side of these cars. Other than that, they are pretty bulletproof. And then the last thing would be excessive brake pad wear on these cars. Once again, for whatever reason, I don't know, but that is basically what a lot of the owners have been saying. So now as we go and look at the RS3s, this is a pretty easy car to find under $50,000. There's plenty of low mileage ones around 42 to 46. As you creep lower to 40, you're probably going to find a bit of higher mileage examples, but this is a pretty new car and pretty low mileage for the price that you are paying. As we get into number 6, there has to be one on every list, so we're talking about the 2005 to 2008 997.1 911 Carrera S. Now, this is a 911 for under $50,000. Yes, depreciation is an absolutely beautiful thing, but that flat 6 that you are going to be getting in this 911 is going to sound absolutely amazing, and the handling of this car is pretty phenomenal. It's due to the fact that the engine sits in the rear, and that creates a really nice weight distribution with a lot of traction coming out of corners as there's weight over the back axle. Now, the flat 6 that comes in the 911 is naturally aspirated and sounds absolutely amazing. If you put any kind of exhaust on it, your ears are pretty much just going to be in heaven. Now, it's not the fastest car in the world in a straight line, but that's not the point of a 911. A 911 is meant to be engaging for the driver and to give you an ultimate driving experience out of a sports car, and the Carrera S achieves just that. It is a 2+2 coupe, so the back seats aren't entirely usable, but you do actually get quite a bit of storage out of them, and all in all, these cars are really not that hard to pick up. Now, some pros and cons of the 997 are that it gives you peak sports car handling. The 911 is known as the top tier, highest echelon of sports cars, and for good reason. Now, the Porsche Flat 6 has that really nice sound to it that is pretty much unique to these cars, and any Porsche is going to have that high build quality and a very luxurious feel to the interior and a very classy look to the exterior. Lastly, there's a large community around the 911. To pretty much any car meet that you go to or anything, there will be 911s all over the place, and everybody seems to love them. Now, the only downsides that I have for this car are the maintenance being expensive like any Porsche, and lastly, the IMS bearing failure. Now, the 987.1 Cayman, as well as the 997.1 Carrera and Carrera S all had this same issue. So from 2005 to 2008, Porsche really struggled with this issue, and it actually happened in the previous generation as well. These engines had something called an intermediate shaft, and that basically was used to help with the timing belt and everything like that. Now, the bearings that held it in place and allowed it to rotate freely and stay in line would often fail and just kind of fall apart. And when this happened, the entire intermediate shaft would seize and the engine pretty much grenades itself. So if this happens, no more engine, so that is a risk you take. This was definitely a big issue with these cars, but you pretty much just got to cross your fingers and hope it doesn't. As we go ahead and look at some of the examples that we could find online, in my area there was not a ton, but I found this black one here for $49,000. It's a 2006, looks plenty nice, and the Carrera S has that nice rear wing. This one had 61,000 miles though, so I tried to see if I could find anything slightly lower. This one had 45,000 miles and was listed for $49,900 and was an absolutely beautiful example of a 911. Getting into our top 5 now, we're going to be doing another Porsche, and it's actually going to be the 981 Cayman S. This is the Cayman that ran from 2014 to 2016, and you may be wondering why I would put a Cayman above a 911. Well, the reason is two things. First and foremost, the IMS bearing failure that we were talking about with the 997 generation was fixed for both the Cayman and the 911 in 2009, so this car does not suffer from that issue. Additionally, this car gets what is known as the PDK, or basically alien technology. It is Porsche's, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but it is basically one of the best transmissions on Earth. Now, the Cayman S of this generation gets a lot more modern technology, was much further updated, and is actually a little bit faster. So the car came with 321 horsepower, but only weighed 2,900 pounds. So it did 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, and is actually pretty quick in a straight line. Now, Porsche's specialty is handling, and the Cayman does very well in that facet too. The Cayman S of this year did a very quick Nürburgring time, and is pretty much a monster on any track that you get it on. It comes with a pretty similar 3.4 liter flat 6 as the 997 did. This engine is just a little bit smaller but equally great sounding. As we get into some pros and cons of this car, the PDK is available, which is a massive plus. I am personally huge on save the manuals. I love driving a stick shift. My past 4 cars have been stick shifts. However, if I were to ever buy one of these cars, I would have to go PDK because it is just that good. And it gives that same Porsche flat 6 sound, which actually sounds even better with the PDK. For me, Porsche is not just the engine that sounds great, it's when you have a PDK mated with it and it's just shifting so crisp and precise and very quickly. That sounds absolutely just awesome, and is definitely a big plus side to this Cayman S. Some of the other things also include the high build quality, same as the 911, and has newer technology than that 911 at roughly the same price. Now, the cons are also pretty similar. It has expensive maintenance and is not very practical. This car doesn't have back seats like the 911. It's just a straight up two-seater because it's mid-engine as opposed to rear engine, and these cars are also known to have oil leaks, but other than that are pretty reliable overall. As we go ahead and look at some of the examples of these cars, there are plenty of 981s below 50,000, like well below 50,000, but you really do want to get a Cayman S. The S makes quite a large difference when it comes to straight line speed because the base model is definitely a little bit of a slouch in a straight line. Now these last four cars are all very close for me, so pretty much from here on out, you could put them in pretty much any order. They are all very tight to one another, but we're going to be putting our first BMW on this list with the brand new Supra, the 3.0 liter version. I believe it is called the Premium. You definitely don't want to go with the 4-cylinder version for $50,000. There are plenty of inline 6 turbos available, which produce 382 horsepower. It's the same engine as the Z4, hence the BMW joke, but this is the Mark V Supra that came from 2020 and onwards, and until 2023 was available only in an automatic. So that is definitely something to look out for. As we approach the new model year, they will be available with a stick shift, and the Supra is one of the best packages that you can buy for $50,000 right now. It is definitely one of the newest cars on this list, as you can find 2021, 2022 examples for pretty much right under $50,000 with pretty much brand new car type of mileage, and this car is pretty quick. In a straight line, it does 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds, which I know in a drag race it absolutely smokes something like a Mustang GT, and on the skid pad pulled 1.07 Gs, so the Supra is definitely not playing around when it comes to handling. Now, the overall experience of the Supra is said to be pretty good. It kind of shares a lot of the attributes as the Mark IV, such as that inline 6 engine, and it also shares a lot of the same plus sides that the Mark IV did. Now, what I mean by that is the Toyota reliability. A lot of the cars on this list are starting to get pretty expensive in terms of maintenance, and when you have a Toyota or Toyota parts, the car is not only going to be very reliable, but it's going to have some very cheap parts and maintenance. This car also has a massive aftermarket sector. I know pretty much right away, as soon as they came out, you saw people slapping twin turbos on them, putting wide body kits on them. You could do pretty much anything that you can think of, because a lot of the companies that worked with the GT86, the BRZ, and FRS are now supporting the Supra too, as they are pretty similar platforms. Now, some of the downsides of this car, I believe it might have been fixed in 2022, but I know the earlier years of this generation have what was known as a cabin buffet, meaning that when the wind would come in, due to the shape of the inside of the cabin, if you had your windows down, it would kind of, you ever been sitting in the back seat, like the front of a car, and somebody's in the back seat with the window open, and you hear that kind of whoa, 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 whoa. You know the sound, right? So these cars do that quite violently, anything over like 60 miles an hour if you have the windows down. So the shape of the cabin did do that. So if you don't drive with your windows down often, it's not a big deal, but that is something to note. Now, the other thing is that they'll probably drop in value. Depreciation hits a lot of these cars very hard, as we've seen time and time again today. And when you're buying a car that is pretty much this new, it's almost inevitable that that is going to happen. So if you are planning on selling it anytime soon or owning it short term, you might not want to go this route. Now, the last thing would be that there's no manual available with this car until 2023, so it is coming, but I don't know that you could find a 2023 under $50,000 right now, as I believe you would have to just straight up buy it new. So some of the ones that we were able to find online, there are plenty of examples well under $50,000, and it's really impressive as you get close how many are pretty much new cars. Here's the silver one. It was listed for $49,990, so just within our budget, and this car only had 9,000 miles on it. So this is basically a brand new car. Now, taking third on our list is a car that I pretty much couldn't even believe was in this price range, and that is the Jaguar F-Type R. In case you're unfamiliar, the F-Type is Jaguar's flagship sports car and pretty much their top notch of performance vehicles. The F-Type R takes that a step further and is pretty much the nicest and fastest of the F-Types. Now, this car MSRP'd for roughly double $50,000, so you're getting a pretty much 50% discount in just a few years' time. This is the F-Type that ran from 2015 to 2018, so the second newest variation, and came with 550 horsepower. It is the most powerful car on this list and absolutely rips in a straight line. That all comes from a 5-liter V8 that Jaguar makes that gives a really low, deep, growly tone, similar to something maybe like an AMG GT or an Aston Martin. Some of the pros and cons of the F-Type R is that it's an acceleration monster. This car is really no joke in a straight line and can definitely get you into some trouble when you put your right foot down, and the torque that this engine produces has been said to kind of give you a gut gut punch and pull really hard at all RPM. It's a very luxurious car with a classy look, similar to something like an Aston Martin, and is very comfortable as it is a nice Jaguar interior. They really do go out of their way to make it a very luxurious ride, and all the while retaining handling. For what this car is and the weight that it is, the handling is still pretty impressive. Now, the downsides that I would have for it are that the reliability of these cars has been said to be a roll of the dice. If you go ahead and look up how reliable they are, you'll find about half the people saying it's the best car they've ever owned and they've never had an issue, and the other half saying that it lit all their money on fire and they're never buying a Jaguar again. These cars also have expensive maintenance, as Jaguar parts are not cheap, and a lot of these get hammered with depreciation. There is definitely something to be noted about the fact that this car is worth half what it was when someone bought it new, and you will likely follow that trend and lose some money if you buy one. Now, as we go and look at some of the examples that you can find online, there's plenty under $50,000, mostly in the 40 to 60,000 mile range. But all in all, the Jaguar F-Type R is an absolute steal of a deal at this price, and that's why I have it at number 3. If you took that F-Type and subtract 50 horsepower and threw out the quality interior and put that same value into handling, you would end up with number 2 on our list, which is the C6 Corvette Z06. This is the years from 2006 to 2008. There are Z06s in the later aspect of this generation, but for $50K, you're going to have to get one of the earlier ones. Now, this car came with the monstrous LS7 7-liter V8, which is widely known as one of the best sounding V8s ever made. It's a manual transmission only, and the stick shifts in these cars, having driven one, I could say that they are very good. It's a very tight, notchy transmission with long throws. The clutch is very stiff with a long throw as well. So the car definitely makes you work, but it is also very satisfying and rewarding to drive. Now, the LS7 makes this car pull plenty hard, doing 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds, which is the fastest car on this list. This car also eclipses roughly 200 miles an hour in a top speed run, depending on which way the wind is going. But all in all, I would go as far as to say that this is the ultimate performance car for under $50,000, and there is nothing on this list that will beat it in all-around performance. It did the fastest Nürburgring time, is the fastest in a straight line, and has some of the best handling that you could find, even under like $60,000, $70,000. So the C6 Z06 is definitely no joke when it comes to performance, but what you're going to have to get over is the interior. It is pretty bad and made of a lot of cheap plastics, and it all cracks and squeaks. It's not the nicest place on earth to be, but if you can get past that, it is definitely one heck of a car. Some of the pros and cons are the strong acceleration and handling. Really just all-around performance is a ton of bang for your buck here, and the LS7 sounds just incredible. You really do have to hear one in person. And although the interior is pretty bad, it is still a lot better than the previous generation. It also has that really nice manual transmission that is very satisfactory to drive, and the only downsides that I would have for this car are once again still the interior and the LS7 valve dropping issue. Now, the valve springs would kind of detach from the valves on some of these cars, and the valve would drop into your combustion chamber, and when that happens, the engine just kind of blows up. So just hope that it doesn't, and if it does, swap it for like an LSX or something and give it like 600 horsepower, and I'm sure it'll be just as fun. As we look at some of them online, there's a good amount of examples out there actually for a lot under $50,000. You can get these really at the high 30s, low 40s, but if you want a really pristine example at low mileage, you're probably going to be pushing a little bit closer to 50. Now, taking the number 1 spot, in my opinion, as the number 1 sports car that you could buy under $50,000 would be the F82 BMW M4. And this is because I am thinking in terms of all-around sports car, and this car really does do it all. It's a 2+2 coupe, so it is somewhat practical. You do have some back seats, and the trunk space is a lot larger than most cars on this list. The 3-liter inline-6 twin-turbo sounds really good. It sounds actually quite a bit like a BMW race car, and pulls very hard. Now, the transmission, you can get a manual in these cars, but I would honestly recommend the MDCT. It's very precise and almost feels like a pneumatically shifted, sequential transmission that you would see in any kind of race car. Now, the car is a little bit heavier than most, but makes up for it with 425 horsepower and gives you pretty much a really nice all-around package. This car was only 6 seconds slower than the C6 Z06 around the Nürburgring, pulls pretty much equally hard in a straight line, and is a lot newer in general. The technology, the look of it, the interior, all of it is far more updated and just nice to the touch, feel, and everyday usage. Now, as we get into some pros and cons, it really is that all-arounder. This car doesn't really step a foot wrong. It doesn't have a very big issue with it, and it is one of the most reliable of the M cars. I know some of these cars get knocked for reliability, but the S55 engine that came in these is known to be very reliable, and it's been out long enough to kind of stand the test of time and have the chance to prove itself. Now, the DCT in this car is near PDK level. It is that good. Very quick on the shifts, very responsive, and it doesn't tend to do anything weird. The high build quality and interior of these cars is also a big step up from something like the C6 Z06. The interior of any M car is really nice. I especially do really like the seats, so check those out if you don't know what they look like. And the sound of the S55 engine is also very nice. Now, the only downsides that I would mark it for are the expensive maintenance, pretty much any German car. Here we are again. And the only other thing would be that it is worse overall performance than other options, namely that Corvette. If you're looking for pure performance out of your sports car and that's all you care about, the C6 Z06 is probably going to be the way to go. But if you're looking for a better all-around package, as my overall number one, I would put the F82 M4. Now, this is another car that is pretty easy to find well under $50,000, which is another reason I put it this high. But if you want a really nice example, it is also going to start creeping up there. Here's one for $49,900 I found actually in Hawaii, but it's a 2020, so even newer than I originally had discussed, and has very low mileage, only 35,000. So this is a heck of a deal for $35K, and overall my favorite car on this list. So that's pretty much going to wrap up my list of the top 10 used sports cars that you can buy under $50,000 in 2023. Now, I know there might be a few better options out there that I might have missed, and if that's the case and you happen to think of one, leave a comment of it down below, just so that everyone that is looking for a car in this price range is aware of what else is out there. And that's going to be just about it for this video. So if you are still here and you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and maybe subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. I definitely plan on doing a lot more things like this in the future with maybe some different price ranges or specific types of cars. So if you subscribe, you can definitely keep a lookout for that and be sure not to miss any of it. So with that being said, thank you for watching and have a nice day.